Welcome to Sunny's Mindset Lab podcast. Today, we're exploring how will you measure your life with its author, Clayton Christensen. This conversation is about using clear thinking to answer one of the most important questions we face: how to live a meaningful and fulfilling life.
Thank you, Sunny. This book came from my desire to help people think more carefully about their careers, relationships, and values before life forces those decisions on them.
Clayton, I want to start there with that observation you made about your own classmates from Harvard Business School. These are people who, from the outside, look like they have it all. What did you see when you met them at your reunions that sparked this whole inquiry?
It was quite troubling, Sonny. On the surface, they were titans of industry, consultants, CEOs, entrepreneurs, wildly successful by any conventional metric. But when we spoke one-on-one, I found this deep, often quiet unhappiness. Some were alienated from their families, others were on their second or third marriage. Some just felt hollow, as if they'd climbed this incredible ladder only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall. It was a stark disconnect between professional achievement and personal fulfillment.
And that really is the terrifying question, isn't it? Because no one sets out to be unhappy. It's easy to judge from a distance, but these were smart, good people with the best of intentions. So how does one actively avoid that fate? How can we be sure we won't wake up at 50 and realize we're one of them?
That is precisely the challenge. It's not about having bad intentions. It's about not having clear, deliberate intentions for the things that truly matter. The drift into unhappiness is a passive process. It happens when you don't have a robust way to think about your life's choices. So the answer isn't a simple formula. It's about developing a strategy for your life with the same rigor you'd apply to building a business.
You call this a kind of success paradox. Can you unpack that for us? How can the very things that lead to professional success simultaneously lead someone to such a bad place personally?
The paradox exists because the tactics that yield short-term career rewards, working longer hours, prioritizing the urgent client demand, making small ethical compromises for a quarterly goal, are often in direct conflict with the investments required for long-term happiness. Building a strong relationship with your spouse, or raising children with strong values, doesn't offer an immediate visible payoff. It's a long, slow investment. The paradox is that the world rewards the former, while your life is ultimately defined by the latter.
You use your own classmate, Jeffrey Skilling of Enron, as a powerful example of this. You describe him as a good, smart man. How does someone like that go so wrong?
Clayton Christensen. I knew Jeff. He wasn't a monster. He was one of the smartest people in our class, deeply analytical, a devoted father. But he and Enron became poster children for what happens when you make a series of seemingly small, marginal decisions that take you further and further away from your moral compass. Each individual choice probably felt justifiable in the moment, a tiny step. But 1,000 of those tiny steps can lead you to a place you never, ever intended to go. In his case, a federal prison.
That's the core of it, right? The idea that these are not grand evil plans. No one writes a 5-year plan for their life that ends with get divorced or go to jail.
Exactly, not one. The problem is that life is a constant stream of allocation decisions. How do you allocate your time, your energy, your talent? The trap is what I call marginal thinking. You think, I can just skip spending time with my family this one weekend to finish this project. Just this once. But the just this once logic is how you end up with a life you didn't choose. The cumulative effect of those marginal decisions creates a strategy you never intended.
So if the problem lies in the decision-making process, the solution has to be there too. You argue against giving people answers. Instead, you advocate for teaching them how to think, using theories. Why is that distinction so important?
Because telling someone what to think is fragile. It might work for one specific situation, but it doesn't equip them for the infinite variety of challenges life will throw at them. A good theory, on the other hand, is a powerful tool. It helps you see the world differently. It explains what causes what and why. It's a general-purpose lens that you can use to frame your own problems and come to your own, better-informed conclusions, whether in business or in life.
Can you give us an example of what you mean by a theory? The way you explain correlation versus causality is so clear.
Certainly. For ages, humans observed that things with feathers and wings seemed to fly. That's correlation. So what did they do? They built wings, strapped them on, and jumped off buildings. It never worked. They were copying the attributes, not understanding the mechanism. The breakthrough came when Daniel Bernoulli articulated the principle of lift, the cause of flight. Suddenly, we understood the why. That's what a good theory does. It moves you from simply observing what is correlated with success to understanding what actually causes it.
And you've used this method with some of the most powerful CEOs in the world. Tell us about your meeting with Andy Grove from Intel.
Andy called me worried about a new low-end microprocessor threatening his business. He asked me to tell him what to do. I said, Andy, I can't. I don't know enough about your business. But what I could do was teach him the theory of disruptive innovation. I spent 10 minutes explaining the model to him. He then looked at his own situation through that lens and said, I see. I know what I need to do. By teaching him how to think, I empowered him to find the right answer for his own context. That is the goal for anyone trying to manage their life.
Okay, so let's take that approach and apply it to one of the biggest parts of our lives, our career. We all want to find a job that brings us happiness. What theory helps us understand what truly motivates people at work?
Clayton Christensen. The most useful theory here is one developed by Frederick Hertzberg. It's often called the two-factor theory or motivation theory. It's one of the most powerful insights into the human condition at work that I have ever encountered.
Hertzberg splits motivation into two distinct categories, hygiene factors and motivation factors. Could you break those down for us?
Of course. Hygiene factors are things like compensation, status, job security, and work conditions. If you don't have them, you will be dissatisfied. But, and this is the key, getting more of them doesn't make you satisfied. It just makes you not dissatisfied. True satisfaction, the kind that makes you love your job, comes from the motivators: challenging work, recognition, responsibility, and personal growth. These are the things that provide intrinsic reward.
That is so counterintuitive. We're taught to think of satisfaction as a single scale. You're saying it's actually two completely separate scales. You can be well paid but still utterly unmotivated.
Precisely. The opposite of job dissatisfaction is not job satisfaction. It is simply an absence of dissatisfaction. It's a profound distinction. You can solve all the hygiene factors, give someone a great salary and a beautiful office, and all you will have is a person who isn't unhappy. You won't have a motivated person. Motivation is a completely different ballgame.
And this explains the trap that so many of your classmates fell into. They pursued the hygiene factors first, telling themselves that famous line.
Yes, I heard it over and over. I'll just do this consulting or banking job for a couple of years to pay off my loans, and then I'll do what I really love. It seems so logical. But the problem is, the goalposts keep moving. The lifestyle becomes more expensive. The golden handcuffs get tighter. They get stuck chasing hygiene factors, perpetually waiting for the day they can finally pursue true motivation. For many, that day never arrives.
You have a wonderful personal story that illustrates this, about a playhouse you built for your children.
I do. My wife and I spent months with our children, designing and building this elaborate playhouse. The process was incredible. The teamwork, the problem-solving, seeing our creation come to life. The kids were so engaged. But a funny thing happened. Once it was finished, they hardly ever used it. The deep satisfaction wasn't in having the finished product. The joy, the motivation, was in the challenge of building it together. It was a perfect personal lesson in Hertzberg's theory.
So if we understand the source of motivation, the next step is building a career strategy to find it. But life is so unpredictable. How do you plan for a future you can't see?
You're right. A rigid, fixed plan is often doomed to fail because the world changes. The key is to understand that strategy is not a single event. It's a continuous process. You need a way to balance your intended plan with the unexpected opportunities and challenges that will inevitably emerge.
In the book, you break strategy down into two sources, deliberate and emergent. What's the difference?
Your deliberate strategy is your plan. It's what you set out to do based on your analysis of the world. But as you execute that plan, things happen. A competitor makes a move, a new technology appears, or you discover a hidden talent. These are emergent opportunities. Your actual strategy, what you ultimately end up doing, is always a combination of the deliberate and the emergent. The skill is in recognizing and harnessing the right emergent opportunities.
The story of Honda entering the U.S. market is such a fantastic example of this. Their deliberate plan was a total failure, wasn't it?
A complete disaster. Their plan was to sell large motorcycles to compete head-on with Harley-Davidson. The bikes were unreliable and leaked oil. The strategy was failing fast, but an emergent strategy appeared by pure accident. The Honda employees were using these little 50cc Super Cub scooters to zip around Los Angeles. Americans saw them, thought they looked fun, and started asking where they could buy one. The management team back in Japan was horrified. This wasn't their grand strategy. But thankfully, the team in the U.S. recognized the emergent opportunity, pivoted, and the Super Cub went on to become the single best-selling motor vehicle in history.
And this isn't just a business principle. You point out that your own life followed a very emergent path.
Absolutely. If you had asked me when I graduated from business school what my career would be, I would have said I was going to be the editor of the Wall Street Journal. That was my deliberate strategy. I never planned to be a consultant. I certainly never planned to be an entrepreneur, get fired, and then become a professor. My entire career has been a series of emergent opportunities that I chose to pursue, and it has brought me far more satisfaction than my original plan ever could have.
That raises a crucial question, though. If we need to be open to these emergent paths, how do we know which ones are the right ones? How do we avoid chasing a bad opportunity and wasting years of our life?
A very important question. You can't know for sure in advance, of course. But you need a low-cost way to test whether a new path is viable before you commit everything to it. There is a tool for this which we call discovery-driven planning.
So, I get a new job offer in a different industry, or I have an idea for a side business. These are emergent opportunities. How do I evaluate them without just taking a blind leap of faith?
Clayton Christensen, you need to approach it like a scientist. A scientist doesn't try to prove a hypothesis is right. They try to find ways to prove it's wrong. You must do the same with your career opportunity.
So the tool is really a question. Instead of asking, will this work, you ask, what has to prove true for this to work? That's a subtle but powerful shift.
It's a complete inversion of the normal planning process. Instead of making a projection and hoping it comes true, you identify all the critical assumptions upon which your success depends. For this new career to be a happy one for me, what assumptions about the work, the culture, the balance, the industry, what has to be true?
Then you find the quickest, cheapest ways to test if those assumptions are in fact true. You use the failure of Disneyland Paris as a huge cautionary tale for this. What was the critical assumption they got wrong?
Disney's entire financial model was based on one crucial assumption, that the average guest would stay for 3 days, just as they did in Florida and California. They built massive, expensive hotels based on this. But they never stopped to ask, what has to be true for people to stay 3 days? The answer is there must be 3 days worth of things to do. And there wasn't. The park could be seen in a day. That single untested assumption led to a billion-dollar loss. We must be just as rigorous in testing the assumptions behind our own life-altering decisions.
Clayton, this brings us full circle. We have these powerful tools for thinking about motivation and strategy in our careers. How do we pull it all together to answer that fundamental question you started with?
Clayton, we have to consciously decide what our metrics are. The world will happily provide you with metrics, your salary, your title, the size of your house. But those are almost always the wrong yardsticks for a fulfilling life. You have to step back and define your own purpose.
In the book, you say it boils down to answering 3 fundamental questions. What are they?
The first is the one we've spent the most time on. How can I be sure I'll be happy in my career? But just as important are the second and third. 2, how can I be sure that my relationships with my spouse and my family become an enduring source of happiness? And 3, how can I be sure I'll live a life of integrity? These are not separate pursuits. They all compete for the same resources of your time, your energy, and your talent. You must manage them coherently.
So, in the end, the theories you've shared are tools, not answers. They can help us find our way, but they can't tell us the destination.
That's right. I can't give anyone the answer to how they should measure their life, but I can give them the tools to find their own answer. The most important work has to be done by each individual. They must decide with great deliberation what yardstick they will use to measure their own life.
Clayton, thank you for such a thoughtful and honest conversation. This discussion gives our listeners a clear framework for thinking about success and fulfillment.
Thank you, Sunny. I hope this conversation helps people be more deliberate about how they choose to live their lives.
This has been Sunny's Mindset Lab. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.